Susan Thomas,
Here.
Chelsea Averett,
Here.
Gerald Winan,
Here.
Mark Lewis,
Here.
Carol Backoffner. Carol Backoffner,
Here.
thank you. Lane Sturdivant,
Here.
Doug Curtis Jr.,
Here.
Amy Williams Spears.
Here.
That's everyone but Tom Pico.
So do we have a quorum?
We do.
And John, if you can lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Everybody mute otherwise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to business items. We have we have that, but before that, I'm going to lead you through a little process here. According to School Board Operations Policy, which is RSU 13 Policy BE, item 2A B, additions and adjustments to the agenda. After the meeting has been called to order, the superintendent board chair may recommend additions or adjustments to the agenda of a regular meeting, or unless otherwise prohibited by board policy, which I do not see or know, to the agenda of a special meeting, which is tonight. So I am adding the following business item, a motion that policy DJ, purchasing requirements, be suspended for purchases using funds from Maine's Coronavirus Relief Fund, CRF, allowing the superintendent to make necessary purchases in a very competitive marketplace in a timely manner. So that will be B when we get to it. Going back to A, authorize the superintendent to file claims in a multi-district litigation and bankruptcy litigation in an effort to recoup damages, including the expenditure of public funds to address the impact of the opioid epidemic on students, teachers, other staff, and the taxpayers of the district caused by certain defendants. Is there a motion?
So move.
Carol, second. Amy, thank you. I do want to again welcome Melissa Huey to our conversation, our attorney, and thank you very much for being here. So now in a discussion, John or Pete, you want to start off with anything at this point?
This motion was brought up at the last meeting and was actually tabled. And we were invited to join in this class action lawsuit, I believe against Purdue Pharma, for alleged damages caused the district due to the opioid crisis and children who have been impaired by their parents' possible use of opioids. There was lively discussion at the meeting, and it was requested that we see if the attorney from Drummond & Whitson could come and talk about that with us. And I'm glad that Melissa Huey, I thank you for making yourself available tonight. We really appreciate it. I think board members have questions that they'd like to ask, and maybe Melissa, if you could, maybe you could just set us up with a little bit of an explanation about how this came to you and ultimately how you invited the board to participate.
Sure, I can just say that we got a referral from a group of national law firms who are heading up this litigation. They're heading up the litigation in the Purdue Pharma bankruptcy, and I think they're also involved in the multi-district litigation against other pharmaceutical companies. They just reached out to us, explained to us generally what the theory of their lawsuit was, and asked if we knew any clients who were interested in it. So the first thing that we did as a firm, or at least those of us who were involved, was to just do a little research on the lawyers to make sure that this wasn't a scam or that they knew what they were doing. And we were confident after doing that research that these are lawyers that have a lot of experience with class actions. And we felt that recommending to our clients that they join in this was a good idea. So what we decided to do as a firm is to just open this up to all Maine schools. Anybody who is interested in joining it, here's the opportunity. And it's really up to you whether you or not you want to join. Our view on this is that since the national law firms are fronting all of the costs, and what they're asking for is a 25% of any recovery there is, that it's really not a lot of risk involved. It may be that districts get some money, it may be that districts get a lot of money, and maybe the districts get almost no money. But given that there is no cost, that looked like something that districts want to be at least considering. Now, I will tell you that as a trial lawyer, when I look at litigation, I look at really three different costs. One is the economic cost of the legal fees and the possible risk of loss and whether you're going to have to pay something. And here, I don't see any risk there because this is you're a plaintiff, so you're not going to have to pay anything. And they're fronting the costs and not actually charging for legal fees. The next thing I look at, frankly, is the cost in terms of staff time and emotion. So litigation can be very emotional and difficult. It can also be very costly in terms of time and how much you have to put into gathering together information, getting together witnesses, preparing them, et cetera, et cetera. And here, the way they are calculating the damages that they're going to be submitting to the bankruptcy court is based on statistics. So they have a national model of how many students people have and how much you would expect special education costs to be increased by those. They have experts who are going to testify on that. Whether a court ultimately accepts that expert testimony or not, I don't know. But what that means for our clients, the schools in Maine, is that this requires very little administrative time. And it is also sort of impersonal because it's not saying you, special ed director, or you, teacher X or Y, did something wrong or something like that. So I don't see any real cost in terms of time or in terms of emotion. So the last prong, the last of that three-legged stool that I look at is publicity. And there are some litigation that districts really need to think long and hard about because there can be a real public relations difficulty in bringing a lawsuit. In this case, I didn't see that making a claim against a national pharmaceutical company that is in bankruptcy is a real public relations nightmare. So again, I didn't see a lot of risk there. So based on our analysis, of the strength of the national law firms who are doing this, and B, of the lack of risk, we thought it makes sense to really just to throw this opportunity out to all of our clients in the state of Maine, just to see if people are interested in joining. So that's sort of how it came to us.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
So what questions can I answer for you all?
Go ahead, folks. Someone's got feedback. Okay, Chelsea.
So I had a couple of questions, and I emailed them, so I think you're familiar with them. There was talk about different classes and different districts, and I was wondering if late entries like us are going to be defined. Is the class defined differently? Would that impact settlements and things like that?
My understanding is that all school districts are going to be in a single class. So whether you come in today or you came in June or March or January, doesn't matter. It really, what they're doing is calculating damages based on number of students. So are you ultimately, if there's a settlement, going to get as much as the Chicago Public Schools? No. But the fact that you're coming in before the deadline, but pretty late is going to be irrelevant.
And so about that deadline, is this common to have to invite people to join this close to the end of the deadline, particularly because the original deadline was actually June 30th. It just seems really weird that they're soliciting clients so late in the process.
So I think, I don't know, honestly, I'm going to tell you frankly that I don't have a lot of national class action law firm lawsuit experience. But what I do understand is that it was initially sort of touch and go as to whether this was a claim that was even going to be accepted by the court. And then when it looked like it was going to be accepted, then the idea was to reach out to other school districts. And it just happened that we had some connections that led them to reach out to us rather than perhaps to law firms in other states, partly because we just represent a lot of schools.
So I know that in the MDL case that they have, which if you didn't read the New York Times, which is the sole source of my information here, the MDL, there were some local governments, and then they ended up doing a global, I've forgotten what the term was, but it was some kind of global settlement so that every single city was automatically included. Is that likely to happen here?
So this is, there are two different lawsuits going on, and one is the MDL, and that's something that school districts may or may not be able to join in later, and a lot of that has to depends on the sort of double recovery idea that if funds are going to states and they're going to municipalities, they may not also go to schools. So the MDL litigation is something a little bit separate, although I'm told by the lawyers that I've been talking to that there may be an opportunity to join that. This is really looking at the Purdue Pharma bankruptcy. So that's a little bit different than the MDL litigation. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but if I didn't, please follow up.
No, so if we joined this Purdue bankruptcy, would it impact how our ability to join anything else?
No, it's
okay,
different defendants, a whole different calculus as to who's joining and who gets funds where.
So we're not closing down our options by taking.
No.
Okay.
This does not close down any options.
Okay. And then my final question is one that came up based on what you said tonight, and might be more of a question for John. But I'm wondering, since they're making an estimate of the costs, I'm wondering how that actually aligns with our costs and whether or not that's going to be really an effective restoration for us if it gets approved. So I'll go ahead and sign off. Thank you, Melissa, for the answers. I appreciate it.
So I can respond in a way on that. And I'm not sure that for every district, the statistical calculation is going to line up precisely or even sort of with the cost of that district, because some districts, just because of what they are, incur more costs and some incur less. But what I can say is that if you're not when there's a bankruptcy, the company goes to court, and everybody who has a claim against that company has to file a claim within X amount of time. So if you're not filing a proof of claim by July 31, you have no claim whatsoever against Purdue Pharma, whether or not your statistics are higher or lower than what these experts are calculating. So does that mean you would have another option? The answer to that is yes. If you wanted to figure out what your actual costs have been and are going to be, and file your own claim in the bankruptcy, you could probably do that. That, however, would come with a cost, because you would have to find your own expert and you would have to find a lawyer to do that, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not sure that makes economic sense, particularly because I will say that, and this is kind of like obvious, but there are a lot of claimants in that bankruptcy and there's probably not enough money to go around. So what comes out of that is hard to predict.
Melissa, follow up. The number of students you mentioned, is that number of special ed students or total students? In terms of
I understand that I'm going to tell you that I am not a math person and I do not understand statistics. So let's start with that. But I understand that the statistical analysis includes both how many students a district has and how many students a district has that are receiving special services. And then you put that in a box and you mush it up and you come up with something. And part of the reason for that is some students have been identified now, but other students are going to be identified in the future. And this is a lawsuit that looks not only at the past, but also the future.
Oh, okay. Thank you, John.
I'll just respond by saying I don't believe that we have either the time or the resources at all to file our own lawsuit. I can't even imagine trying to do that. So that's just my opinion.
Okay. Other questions? Doug.
So Melissa, probably the reason you're here tonight is because of me.
Thanks.
I got a bunch of questions for you. Chelsea touched on a couple of them. So I want to first of all talk about your compensation first. So what I heard you say tonight, your firm will be paid a referral fee based on whatever the collection is for your clients?
So the national law firm takes 25% of what's recovered, and Drummond Woodson takes 10% as a referral fee.
Okay. And so that's above the 25%?
No.
That's part of it.
That's within the most you pay is to 25%.
Okay. And then as per the agreement that you gave for the superintendent to sign, you mentioned, you alluded to it about all the expert witnesses, all the administrative costs, all the other things. So in your professional opinion, normally speaking, how high could that possibly run? 25, 30%, 50%?
The costs?
Yes. In addition to the 25%, it talks about in the agreement for the superintendent to sign all the other things like expert witnesses, travel, hotels, all those things, in addition to the 25%.
So
in your professional opinion, what would that cost? 50%?
No, I don't think so. And the reason, if the case were to go all the way to trial, I think it would be probably 30, 35%. I think that in a case like this, it's highly unlikely that most of that litigation will occur. I think most of it is this is going to be a negotiated settlement, pretty much out of the box. So my suspicion is, and I will frankly admit that this is just looking into my crystal ball, which sometimes works and sometimes does not. But my suspicion is that this is going to be a negotiated settlement before much, if any, litigation occurs. I think that if that was not the case, it probably wouldn't make economic sense for these national law firms to do that.
Okay, so you're assuming that they're gonna settle no matter what?
Yeah, I would be shocked if there was an actual trial on this case. I think that what's going to happen is once all the proofs of claims are in the bankruptcy court, they're going to do a number of lengthy mediations and try to hash out a deal so that everybody gets paid something and the lawyers don't take all of the money. Because if you went through all of those litigations with all of these high-powered national law firms, nobody would get anything. So I think it's going to be an early negotiated settlement. But again, it's a crystal ball.
Hey, Doug, can I
Okay,
interject
so-
here? Doug, can I interject here for a second? Are you
Sure.
asking if there will be any additional costs to the RSU, or if the expert fees and et cetera are going to be part of the settlement? There's a big difference there.
It's the latter.
Okay.
Latter. Yeah.
So it would only reduce the amount that we would get. There would be no out-of-pocket costs for the RSU.
That's correct.
There wouldn't have been any out-of-pocket costs in dollars, but there'll be other costs involved. But what I'm hearing you say, Melissa, you tell me if I'm wrong, probably at a minimum, we're talking about a third.
I think that's a reasonable guess, yes.
Okay. One other question about the document itself. You guys are not, Drummond & Woodson is not listed on the document. I was wondering if you could explain why that is. Is it because it's a referral?
The reason it is that in the national law firm is provided us with the document that it is requiring in order to file a proof of claim. That's number one. Number two is, although they've suggested a referral fee to us, we have not agreed on that. In fact, we're sort of agnostic about the amount of money that we're going to get for this.
Well, I mean, as I read this agreement myself, it makes sure that the attorneys are taken care of. I just want to say that publicly from what I can see.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, it doesn't give us any leeway to make any changes. And normally speaking, all agreements, as you know, as an attorney, are negotiable. So if we wanted to negotiate something different with you, it would not be possible because this is the agreement that all the law firms are signing on to. Is that what I'm hearing?
What I can tell you is, I mean, I can go back to them and say this district would be willing to join the lawsuit if you'll reduce the fees. I don't believe that that's going to happen, but I'm happy to do that for you.
Well, what I'm just saying is, you know, when you have expert witnesses, if you go to court, you never know what they're going to do. You might be 100% correct with what you're telling us, but we don't ever know. And so if they do end up going to court, even for a short period of time before they come to an agreement, or this drags on for years, as an example, basically we could wipe out any settlement, just in attorney's fees, arbitration fees, whatever the case may be. Okay.
Right.
There's no guarantee this is going to be a quick settlement by any means, from what I can see.
And I absolutely agree with you, and I think that's why I started out by saying this could be, you could get some money, you could get a very little bit of money, you could get some money, you could get a fair amount, but I can tell you, my professional opinion is this is not going to be a windfall. So if it's an opportunity that you're interested in, that's fine. And if it's an opportunity that you think, you know what, this is too good for the lawyers and we're not interested in it, that's fine too. But I feel like it's a good opportunity to offer people, and everybody has their own calculus as to whether it's worth it.
Yeah, I want to jump in.
I
and
don't want to monopolize it. I don't want to monopolize everything, but I got 2 or 3 more questions. Lauren.
hold on just 1 second, Doug, and that is that I don't expect a lot of money from this at all, but I expect to send a message. There are lots of reasons why adults and parents get hooked on opioids. There's lots of reasons, but this is one, that a company pushed them. And we need to send a message to them and to the whole country that, nope, that's not okay. It affects kids, their ability to learn, classroom situations, special ed costs, which then gets passed on to taxpayers. So I don't expect to get an awful lot, but I do expect it to send a message. Doug, go ahead.
Well, I thought that was probably going to be the discussion we'll have after we have these questions with Melissa, but if that's what you want to talk about, we can do that now. Because, I mean, those are things we should talk about anyway as a board. Do you want me to continue or you want me to have somebody else give you?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. So Melissa, since Purdue Pharmacy, Purdue Pharma Company Group is in bankruptcy or in the process of bankruptcy, can you explain to you why you feel that we'll be successful in this?
So I guess I'm having a little bit of trouble understanding your question. So if I don't answer it correctly, don't think that I'm trying not to, just tell me that I'm not, okay?
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so they are in bankruptcy, but the legal system in the bankruptcy proceeding is pretty much the same as it is if you're out of bankruptcy. So you have a claim against somebody that they were negligent or they were fraudulent or they were wrongful in some other way. And if you can prove it, and I think that that we have a good, that school districts have a good claim, given what I understand about the fraudulent activities of these pharmaceutical companies, that they hook people on narcotics, and that it is foreseeable that if you hook people on narcotics, their children are going to be adversely affected, and therefore special ed costs for districts around the country are going to be elevated. So that to me is a meritorious claim. So in bankruptcy, the difference between bankruptcy and regular civil litigation is if there's a claim in bankruptcy and it's X, that goes into a pot and it gets, your X gets sort of, is part of the entire thing. So that means you get less than you would if you went to a jury. That doesn't mean you get nothing. So what I'm saying is, I think that as I understand the facts, and I will tell you that I don't have, certainly have not delved into all of the documentation or anything like that, but as I understand the facts, there is a strong claim against Purdue Pharma. And therefore, and I think that the statistical calculations may carry the day. So I think that there is a good chance that a bankruptcy court judge or jury, depending upon how that would be decided, would fine for the school districts.
Okay, and so just kind of like last 1 or 2 questions, and I'm done for a while. I'm looking at a time frame, and so opioids has been going on for like the last 20 years. There's nobody in our district, no administrator in our district that's been here 20 years. So, and I understand that we have some of these kids that may have been damaged by opioids, but I'm wondering how every school district in Maine, or that people that you represent, would have the ability to figure out how they were impacted. All I can say is, you mentioned special ed. I don't think special ed is the only cost by any means in this whole thing. But I'll give you an example. In MSAD 5, in 1992, the special ed budget was $900,000. In 2020, it's $9 million. Now, that doesn't mean that all those people are on opioids or whatever the case may be. But I don't think we have the expertise in this district to go back 20 years and determine what the damages would have been per year, because we don't have the people here for one thing. We have very few teachers here that have been here that long. And we certainly don't have any administrators that have been here that long. And we also have two districts that came together. So for the time frame for this lawsuit, how far back are they looking to gather information?
So, as I said, what they're doing here is not actually asking each district for the statistics that they have. What they have is a national database of numbers of students and numbers of students receiving special services, and they do a statistical analysis to say, we assume that if you have X number of students, etc., that your costs are going to be increased by X number. So it's not individualized as to district. I agree, and I think that the superintendent said earlier that you would not have the resources to be able to calculate to the dollar, or even to come up with a good estimate of the actual cost. So this is going to be calculated on a nationwide statistical basis.
All right, so
So if I understand this one, let me finish one. So if I understand you correctly, basically you're going to look at our student population as of today and make a statistical analysis, and you're not going to go back and look at because we have fewer students in our district today than we did 5 years ago and 10 years ago. So I assume that we're going to look at this year's numbers, and you're going to tell us what we might be eligible for based on that.
No, I don't believe that's the case. And as I said before, I do not have enough understanding of the statistical analysis to be able to explain it, or really even make accurate representations about it. But as I understand it, what they're looking at is a period from when the statute of limitations starts, which is 6 years ago, and into the future. So they're saying, okay, so we have this 6-year period, and we're looking at student populations for that, and then we're going to project into the future as well.
Okay,
All right,
so
Doug,
we're going to look 6 years back then.
Yep, 6 years back. Can you hold off just for a second, give other people a chance and come back to you? Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay. Other folks have some questions here? Yes, Lane, go ahead. Then Gerald.
Yeah, this might be a really quick question because I'm not sure that you can actually answer it, or it might be a simple answer. But our town manager in South Thomaston mentioned to me that the town had also received some sort of invitation to join in a lawsuit against Purdue. He seemed to be under the impression that it was the same case number, and I don't know what that means, but I was wondering what it would mean if the RSU 13 school district signed on, if it would be in some way separate from anything to do with if the town or Knox County signed on. They would be going at it separately, but it wouldn't be kind of like, because we have students from South Thomaston attending RSU 13, there wouldn't be any conflict, I guess, or relationship between the town as a claimant and the district as a claimant.
So I'm not surprised if it has the same case number, because the case number is the case number for the entire Purdue bankruptcy, I'm assuming. And in terms of, I've been getting a lot of people, and it's more, I get these questions more often with municipal school districts. But it is true that states and cities and counties are also have claims against Purdue Pharma. This is more specialized because the states are sort of broader. And it is possible that a settlement would be municipal based and instead of school based. But I think it's more likely that the court and the mediators and the lawyers that are going to try to put together a settlement, let's assume first that it's settled, would look at specific claims. So I think if you decide not to join this lawsuit and the various municipalities that make up your RSU do join it, it's possible that you will receive a recovery anyway. But I don't think there's any conflict, and I don't think there's any reason not to join in different capacities. Part of that is because the more you're joined, the more you have an opportunity to collect money. And part of it is because, frankly, as Mr. Curtis said before, we can never predict what happens in litigation. And it could be that the municipality, something happens with the municipalities that kicks their lawsuit out. And then at least if you're a district and you're still there, that's great. That's not a huge possibility, but it's a possibility. So it just seems to me that, you know, it makes sense to be in there as much as you can.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Gerald.
Hi, Melissa. So correct me if I'm wrong, the nature of a class action lawsuit is that it actually goes to the average impact on each of the individual claimants. And that's just how you would have to do it. If you wanted to show, if you wanted to demonstrate that you were more impacted, you would have to file your own lawsuit. So this is the sort of the nature of the beast.
Correct.
Okay, so and I'm actually talking to Doug here. That's where we're at. If we want to join this, we're going to go with the average. We're not going to do our own work to figure out how much we were impacted. We're going to be using these national statistics to do so. And then the second thing is that if it's true that there is no out-of-pocket cost to our district, I don't see what the issue is of whether we recover 25% or 50% or 67%. It's I don't want to use the term free money, but it's not costing us anything. So if the lawyer fees are chewing up at 25% or 30%, it doesn't matter to me. It really makes no difference to me. Even if we get 10% back, it doesn't make any difference to me, because it's more money than we're not getting right now. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Yes, Amy.
What Gerald said. 100%.
All right. Thank you. Other questions?
Lauren?
Yes, Susan.
I agree. It's all of those questions are highly technical and very interesting, but if we are not part of the suit, then we won't, if there is a settlement that does have money, we won't get any. And it's certainly not going to cost us a lot of money and time. To me, it just makes sense that we should be part of this class action.
Thank you. John.
This doesn't have anything to do with that, but just a point of information. I'm about to get slammed with a severe thunderstorm. So if I leave the meeting, it's not because I'm shirking my responsibilities.
Man, you got it bad up there in the ridge. You got it bad. Sorry, man. All right, hope it doesn't happen. Other thoughts, questions? Yes, Chelsea.
I have two things to say. One is just an interesting stat I read recently. Apparently, 80% of opioid addictions originated in a prescription medicine. So there really is a very strong case here. It's really shocking, honestly, how much, well, we all know that. The other thing I'll say, this is not a reason to vote against it. I'm going to vote for this. But I do think it's really interesting that they're looking at a national model, and we've been impacted so much more highly. And I think that's going to be an issue because we're not going to be, if you look at national special education levels, they are far lower than our state and our local levels. So I think that's a concern. It's not a concern we can fix. I just think it's something interesting for us to consider.
Yeah, but I don't think we can attribute unless we do a study, I don't think we can attribute the opioid addiction to that. And that's where this is all at.
Well, we have been.
I don't see any empirical data that's demonstrating that's why we're having a high level of special ed kids.
Well, and I think those are some interesting questions because we have been attributing it to the opioid addiction. So I think it's just an interesting conversation. I don't think it's directly relevant to the vote here.
Yes, Doug.
So Melissa, one of the questions I'm concerned about is the amount of time that the district is going to be spending on this. And basically we're talking primarily administrative staff, the superintendent, special ed director, principals are pretty busy right now with this pandemic. That's one of my biggest concerns. So based on these statistics that you're talking about, what amount of time do you think it's going to have each school district that you represent to spend on this to gather this information that you need for this lawsuit?
What I can tell you is that a number of districts so far have chosen to join the lawsuit, and they have the amount of the only thing that they've had to do is provide a fee agreement and a board resolution because the rest of it is statistical. What I'm told by the national lawyers is that if the case goes to trial, they may want to talk briefly with a handful of special education directors who to provide anecdotal evidence of what's going on. So
I'm sorry I missed the first part of what you said. I apologize, but I was listening, so I couldn't hear the very first thing you said.
Okay, usually I can play back exactly what I said because I find myself so fascinating. But
There you go.
I'm not sure. So what did I start with? Does anyone remember what I started with?
You started with just what the districts so far have had to provide. And what
so far what the district has, all they've had to do is provide the fee agreement and the a board resolution because this is
what are the fee agreements? I'm sorry. What are those?
The fee agreement is I think that's the fee agreement that you've reviewed.
Oh, that's this contract right here?
Yes. And
so no statistics. You don't need to know how many students we had in the last 6 years.
We're going to need to know that.
Anything, nothing.
We're going to need to know student count, and then their statistics will take that and then make projections.
They have the student count because that's all provided to the state. So that's all in their database. There are a handful of schools in New Hampshire that don't have that information at the database, but I understand that all main schools that information is available to them.
Okay. Other questions, thoughts, or ideas? I just want to add, a lot of people grow up in really, really fearful environments, and they live in fear after that, and their brain changes, and they're just living in generalized anxiety, which is like walking around with someone holding a gun to your head. It's that bad. And then you hurt your back or something, and they give you an opioid with a painkiller. When that wears off, and you're suddenly, oh my God, I've never felt like this before. This is awesome. I don't have fear. I don't have anxiety. I feel great. I want more of that. And then a physiological addiction happens. This drug company knew that. They've known for a long time their drug is very addictive. It happens in that progression, and people spend a lot of money to buy them. So again, I don't know what kind of money we'd ever get if we ever do. To me, that's not the point. It's the message to send to drug makers. You can't do this to our communities, to our families, to our kids, and to our schools. Can't do it. Anything else before we vote? Doug?
So the only thing I want to add to this whole conversation, the reason I asked to have this delayed a week is I wanted to try to learn as much as I could. And Melissa answered a lot of the questions I was concerned about. I learned about tonight, about what the plan is. And although I'm not a big fan of wasting people's time, I'm more worried about wasting taxpayer dollars than I am anything else. And I don't want our administrative team strung out doing massive amounts of research for any of them while we're in the midst of a pandemic. I can support the fact that if they're just going to use statistical analysis that's already on file with the state, and we don't really have to do anything other than sign an agreement, that's pretty simple. And I agree with Lauren about the opioid crisis. It's very serious in our city, very serious in our state. And I don't think it's very funny at all. But I also am concerned that families who suffered from this are not being rewarded by this lawsuit as well, which is definitely not in this contract. But I don't know all the wherewithals. All I can say is, it sounds to me, when we're talking minimum amount of time, from what I gather from Melissa is, we're talking basically getting board approval and signing this agreement and nothing else. So if this becomes much more deeper than that, then I would be concerned about it because we don't have the time to spend on this. So I would support it based on what Melissa has told me. But if it changes, I'll be very mad. So I hope the fact that this is true and this is all we have to do.
Gerald?
So Melissa Coate, is the RSU able to withdraw from the lawsuit at any time?
Yes, you can always withdraw from a lawsuit.
So if it gets to the point where it's involving a lot of staff time, we can just withdraw from it.
You may.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else before we vote? Seeing none, the superintendent will call the roll.
Lauren Andrews,
Yes.
Tom Pico is absent. Susan Thomas,
Yes.
Chelsea Everett,
Yes.
Gerald Winan,
Yes.
Mark Lewis,
Yes.
Carol Backoffner,
You're on mute, Carol.
Yes.
Lane Sturdivant,
Yes.
Doug Curtis Jr.,
Yes.
Amy Williams Spears.
Yes.
Unanimous among the members present.
Thank you. And thank you, Melissa. Thank you very much for spending some of your Thursday night with us. Thank you. Thank you. And now you may return to your laundry.
Well, thank you for not mocking my laundry room. I appreciate it. I gotta get a background.
I'm actually intrigued that there isn't anything. It was sort of that kind of, like, I'm not going either way with it. Just this nice small.
Have fun, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Melissa.
All right. So looking at my iPad again. And so this next business item, which I read before, which was sent to us by Pete. Thank you very much, Pete, for all of your work on this really quickly. But we can read that again and then get a motion. And then Pete, maybe you can describe sort of some quick history, quick background. And unless things have changed since you've talked to me, Pete, I hope you're all sitting down because it's a remarkable thing here that's happening. So again, I'm gonna read this just to get it completely in the record. A motion that policy DJ purchasing requirements be suspended for purchases using funds from Maine's Coronavirus Relief Fund, allowing the superintendent to make necessary purchases and a very competitive marketplace in a timely manner. Is there a motion? Susan, and seconded by Chelsea. Thank you. So John, it's up to you if you want Pete to go or you want to go first, up to you. Yep, Pete, go ahead.
So I guess one thing I want to ask the board chair is, do you want to have a motion to add an agenda item to precede this?
I read our policy that I don't need to have a motion
Okay.
to add the agenda item. I read our policy that I or John can simply add something to the agenda after we call the meeting to order.
That's correct.
Great. So you want to give the,
Can I just really quickly, and then I'll let you give the
No,
details, Pete. This is one of these things that came upon us really quickly last night. Almost before I went to bed, I get a priority mail. I get a lot of those from the DOE outlining that we were going to receive a CRF allocation from the governor's office, basically, for purchases related to COVID-related expenses. And those are, in the parameters of that are very broad. And it's a significant amount of money. I'll let Pete get into the financial details of it, but I was pretty bowled over. And the reason this is on the agenda for tonight is we really need to act quickly on some of these purchases. And I'm hoping the board will recognize that it's a very rapidly evolving, fast-moving situation. And some of these purchases, now that we have some funds, we really need to jump on. So I'm asking for some latitude in terms of spending, and I assure you that I would communicate with the board thoroughly on everything that we are doing and plan to do. So I'll let Pete talk about the actual dollar cents and so on, where this is coming from.
If I can add one thing about what John just said, is that every district is in the same position. And so imagine hundreds of buyers looking to buy the same thing that's not readily available. And so we're seeing material costs go up in construction now because people aren't making plywood or whatever. So we're one district amongst hundreds and thousands of districts doing the same thing. So we need to act quickly to get to, it's not even the cost, it's what it's going to be available. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Pete, go ahead.
I'm going to start with the first paragraph of the release that was sent out late last night, which states, on Friday, Governor Mills announced a commitment of funding for Maine's schools and students through the state's Coronavirus Relief Fund, the CRF, in the amount of $165 million, representing a significant and urgently needed investment to support the necessary preparations of facilities and procurement of transportation, technology, contracted services, PPE, supplies, etc. This funding represents the first of a two-part request, chronologically prioritizing funds to support the startup expenses that schools are incurring now and throughout the summer, recognizing that additional funding will be needed once the new school year begins. So we've read the stories in the newspapers and on TV, we've heard about them, of this $165 million. Well, last night that was allocated to every single district. So there was just a $165 million infusion to the finances of every single school system in Maine, really on very specific uses, which could be anything from school buses and vans to dividers for tables, for more tables or more desks, because we can't use some of the long tables that we could previously, that we need some more separation. It could be used for technology to allow us to do some kind of programming to students while they're at home, in addition to programming to students while they're in person, or anything on that whole spectrum of different types of teaching. So just thinking about the policy about purchasing and knowing that a lot of these purchases could be in excess of $10,000, it seemed, and knowing that there's going to be a lot of competitive in the purchasing of some of these products, because a lot of the sources of these products are limited. Think about the construction industry in general. Think about just the renovation of spaces, or a lot of districts are buying big tents for outside classrooms. Some are trying to rent trailers for classrooms. That, again, there's going to be a limited supply to a lot of these. So we just felt that the sooner that we could put our orders in, the sooner we could get on the list for shorter delivery times. We have 3-week delivery times right now for some items, and they could be 3 months in a matter of no time. So
Pete, how much are we getting?
we're getting $1.4 million.
Yeah, yeah.
165 million.
$1.4 million. That
I spent that 3 times over, by the way.
You what?
I've already spent that 3 times over.
Yeah. And we have to spend it by.
So this money has to be spent immediately, has to be spent by December 30th, excuse me. So it would not be, in my opinion, this is not really to purchase or to hire somebody for a school year, because the funding for it's only funding for 4 months of a school year, or 3 months instead of the entire 10 months. But as you recall, we also have CARES Act funding of approximately $600,000 that we still have, that we have about 27 months to use, that could accomplish some of those goals. We've kind of identified, or I have, and I've kind of gone over this with our central office admin team. Big areas that we see this money being used for right now would be transportation, to lower the to lower the student count on the number of buses. So we could actually go out and purchase buses or vans. It includes the protective shields that would go inside the buses to surround the bus driver or possibly between seats. It includes grounds work. It could theoretically be used for work to allow us to simultaneously unload students from buses and from cars, because we're going to see a lot more parent drop-offs in our schools, and separating that in some of the schools that don't have that right now would be helpful. Buildings
As an example,
themselves.
you mean like at the middle school, there's not a separate drive area for buses and cars? Is that an
Middle
example?
school would be one. We could use a side entrance there. The biggest one, I think that the biggest need for something creative would be the Thomaston Grammar School, which has really just kind of a lollipop entrance, one way in, one way out, on one loop. So
one of the powerful parts of this is that we're going to spend this money now to make our kids more safe and our staff more safe from COVID-related things. But these are permanent changes that are going to be very helpful to our district and very helpful to taxpayers over time. Carol.
I wonder about, does this say we have already decided on a plan, because that we're going to put our kids on buses and take them to schools? Or I don't recall that we have made that decision, nor have we seen the 3 possible plans yet. So I'm wondering about buying separators or dividers or whatever you call them when we don't have a plan yet. So I agree that the money is a great thing, but it just sounds like a decision has come about due to this money. And I have grave concerns about putting kids and especially staff in a prolonged system of exposure. So I'm concerned about that. I know we have families who have, once we open things up, have gone about as if this was a normal summer, going to beaches and parties and barbecues. And what are those kids going to be, since we're not going to do testing on everybody when they go back to school? I'm concerned about those kids, asymptomatic kids or staff coming into the schools, and then we have a big outbreak. So I think we're getting way too comfortable with our good numbers in this state, and I'm concerned. So how does this money, I guess back to my original question, does this money presume a plan?
I think this money is intended to give us the infrastructure to allow the board to make a plan and allow us to execute a plan. For example, things that we're doing, those were probably, they were top of my list on my printed list, but really the bigger things that we're looking at are, we've been pricing out a system that would ionize all of our air handling equipment so that our air every 30 minutes in every one of our buildings would be COVID free and prevent the virus from spreading.
In the classrooms as well as the hallways?
The entire building, every single air handler, every single univent, every piece of equipment that transfers air. So in addition to what we're doing right now, which is opening up and getting as much fresh air in the buildings, this actually ionizes and changes the particles, the positive and negative atomic level particles, and doesn't allow the virus to attach itself to the human cell. So this is something that we're using already with ionizing and disinfectant, but this actually ionizes the air. And again, it's every single part of the building where airflow, and with this whole new system, it just attaches to all this brand new equipment and uses that same airflow.
Then why is there not a national ionization plan? If the science on this says that it can change the air and the virus just can't attach, then I haven't seen the science on that.
All right,
Has
so
anyone?
don't know. We'll get back to that. But John, do you want to add something before then we'll go to Amy?
Well, I want to just reiterate what Pete said, is these funds are going to give us the availability and the flexibility to create infrastructure for whatever kind of plan the board approves. And time is of the essence here. And had this been made available a month ago, I would say, well, we can afford to wait. But right now, we can't afford to wait. We're in an emergency situation, and it is still an emergency situation.
I'm not against vote. I'm going to vote
I'm
yes.
speaking. Thank you very much. Thank you. And what we're really asking for is for some flexibility to be able to get out ahead of some of these items. And I'm not tying this to anything that's a plan specific. We're doing things to improve our infrastructure so that we can be adaptable. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you. Amy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think that Carol made a really good point. There's sort of a complicated matrix or cycle here. Really happy to get the additional funds. Totally trust Pete and John to, make the purchases. But I am concerned, as Carol is, that we haven't really decided on what plan we're going to go ahead with, whether it's going to be all virtual or it's going to be everybody goes back to school or some hybrid thereof. And so the investments that we make that's going to have an impact on what are the best investments. And, if we're not busing kids, then school buses aren't the top priority, I would think. And so I guess if we, I don't know, I'm nervous about the whole thing. I said this in the last meeting, but it bears repeating that there's more people coming into Maine now. August is the month when everybody comes to Maine, and the borders are more open. And it's exactly what Carol said. It freaks me out when I drive down the road, go to Port Clyde, you go to the Drift End Beach or whatever that beach is called, which is in the middle of nowhere, and people are shoulder to shoulder. And it's 20 cars parked along the side of the road, and only 5 of them are from Maine. And I'm not one of those people that's against people from away. And I'm going off on a tangent here, but there's a lot of people in Maine right now who we're not testing and controlling, and we have no idea what impact that's going to have. And, I don't know, in terms of the spending, it seems like, yes, we trust John and Pete, but what are we spending our money on? And what we're spending our money on is going to depend on the plan. And the plan is going to depend on what happens in September. And we don't know what's going to happen in September because August is a wild card in Maine.
So I'm gonna step in real quick. Sorry, and Amy, I've repeated that comment that you made last meeting about August and September so many times in the last week because I think it's so impactful to me. You know, I don't even know if we're ever going to have to use this without board, knowing what we're doing. The process is the bidding process. It's going out to bid. It's negotiated procurement. That's really going to take a lot of time. So we would still go ahead and make every effort to get the board and finance and facilities, especially on board with some of these purchases. But being able to go and at least say, yes, put us in your queue to put this in for Siemens, knowing that we probably have a week or 2 or 3 sometimes to cancel that order. I think the same thing when we have to go order partitions. I just think we just want to be I guess forthright with the board. That was the thought behind this, and just make sure that we were not violating the procurement process. It wasn't intended to try to not get the board involvement. It was really more about the process and the negotiated piece and having $10,000. I think we have authorization through the budget process to spend grant money, but I think the procurement process, I guess we just wanted this to be kind of upfront with this with the board and kind of giving the blessing on the, and really only on this money. It doesn't mean that if we spent the CARES money, we wouldn't go through a procurement process, or general fund money. Obviously, we're not asking for that too. It's really just for this money, which has to be sent by the end of the year, or we lose it.
So before Doug and Mark, I just want to say to you all that the plan is to vote on the plan 2 weeks from tonight. And I asked John to send us the plan the Friday before, which is a week from tomorrow. So we all have time to digest and redigest and email him or anyone any questions, and then get to the vote on August 6th. And John's point, and I think it's a great point, is that he wants to, and we want to open school when we're ready. And if we're not ready on the 8th for some reason, we can put that off. But anyway, I just want you to know the plan about the plan, so you know what's coming up, and we'll have plenty of time to read and respond and ask questions. Go ahead, John, before I go to Doug.
So you will have your draft. We plan to send it out week from Friday.
Week from tomorrow, right?
Yeah, week from tomorrow. And then we'll also have our designation red, yellow, green from the DOE and the governor's office on the 31st. So then we'll actually know, what our designation is, what's going on, what it looks like, and then the board will make decisions from there. So I'm definitely not trying to force the board's hand at all. We're just trying to make sure that we get on board. I can sign the assurances for the funds, and that we can just start a process. That's all. We're not committing anything.
All right, thank you.
So that's all we're asking for.
So Doug, Mark, then Carol. So Doug.
So I'm going to be fairly quick, but I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but I agree with Carol and Amy. But also I want to add a couple of things. Everybody remembers when the pandemic started and in March, and there was a rush on toilet paper, right? And people started hoarding toilet paper and Clorox wipes and those types of things. We're going to see the same thing here again on hand sanitizer, on Clorox wipes, things like that. I think this makes a lot of sense to me, what Pete's proposing, because, and I want to give you an example. So if the decision is that we have 1,500 kids in the system, and let's just say that they need some protection. So we assume that they're going to wear face masks, so we're going to have to buy some of those. We're going to have to maybe have shields for the teachers, things like that make a lot of sense. One of the problems that I'm already uncovered is, in my office, is the plastic shields that you see when you go shopping and whatever it is. We ordered one, actually two, 3 weeks ago. It came in yesterday. They were $80 a piece. Anyone seen them? They're right here. That says on my desk now. If you take $80 times 1,500 kids, that's $120,000, which is well above the $10 limit, if that was the product that you chose to do. So everything he's talking about makes 100% sense to me, because the sooner you put that order in, Every school in the nation is opening up on September 8th. Every single one of them. So if that's the case, then I think those are the types of things that we need to order tomorrow, because everybody and his brother is going to be doing the same thing. One thing I think that's smart is if we know that every year or every 2 years we replace a bus or something, well, this makes perfect sense on how to save money from our normal budget to replace the bus now or a van now that we're going to replace with this money. So that's like a no-brainer to me. That's a simple no-brainer. I don't know how many buses we might need in the future, but we know we're going to need 1 or 2 going forward, or 1 or 2 vans. So that makes sense right off the bat to go in and do some of that money for that. I'm just telling you, I am a numbers person. I do think that way. And there's many other things that we probably will need. One of the things you've heard me talk about in the past is like the thermometers and temperature checks for kids. And we should buy those for our nurses to have all year round for years to come. So I don't think that's a bad thing to purchase those types of things. But we definitely need them now, I think. Maybe other people disagree with that. But whatever we do need, we need Pete to have the ability to go out now and order some of these things that we know we're going to use in the fall, especially the Clorox wipes, especially all the face masks that we're going to have to pick up, and whatever shields we're going to have for the teachers. And if we're going to do what I just did, and you're going to wait 3 weeks for 2, can you imagine if you have to buy 1,500 of them, how long you're going to wait? So I think it's a great idea to go ahead and approve this tonight. I'm okay with everything he's doing. We'll have to have some checks and balances, and maybe we'll buy the wrong things, and we'll have things we don't need. But you know what? Over the next 5 or 10 years, think of it like these things are going to use more than once, and that's what we have to consider. And just be judicious in what we buy. That's all you can do. That's about all I'm going to say about it.
Thanks. Mark?
Yeah, I was just, am I on?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think we might be, I mean, it certainly makes perfect sense to be concerned, as Amy expressed and Carol expressed as well, but I think we may be getting over our skis a little bit, just, you know, with regards to what Pete and John are talking about. These things, whether they're barriers or wipes or the ionization systems, these are things we're going to need anyway. And if this thing comes up and John sees, you know, okay, these are available, let's get them now, you know, that makes perfect sense. We're going to need them regardless. And this is going to be true whether we open in September or October or January, however it works out. But, you know, we're playing 3-dimensional chess while blindfolded here. You know, I'm not sure there's a right answer. We have to be ready for any contingency. And it makes perfect sense for me, for John and Pete to have the absolute latitude. And they just said they would be, will of course inform us as these things go on in real time, rather than, you know, having sit down and take a vote on it. But these are things we're going to need regardless. And, you know, we don't know what the plan is because, as Amy said, we don't know what the numbers are going to be in August or September, but we got to be ready in any way.
Thank you. Carol? Carol, can't hear you. Carol?
Two things. First of all, when we get a week from tomorrow, when we get plan, is it going to include all 3 possible scenarios? Because that's what we asked for last time. At least I and somebody else asked for that. So that's number one thing. And number 2, there are, for the little kids, we saw a lot of surveys saying their little kids wouldn't wear masks, couldn't adapt to masks, they wouldn't know how to use masks, wouldn't keep them on. I saw these little hats. They look like fisherman's hats, like the Gorton fisherman guy. And they come down over the head, and this is all plastic all around the side. So it's a circular shield on the edge of a fisherman's hat. And I think, Pete, if you're looking into protective gear, and I think we should look at ordering that kind of thing to reassure the families of little kids that whenever we do open, if we have a mask or PPE requirement for kids, these kids could have these little hats, they could decorate them, there could be a little contest type of thing. If you make something fun, you know, little kids go for it, and so do their parents. And I'll end with saying that I intend to vote yes on this. I think time is of the essence, and my comments prior were comments of caution and not to say that I object to this at all, because I don't.
The answer to the first question that you had, Carol, the answer is yes.
Great.
You outlined 3 different scenarios because we're going to have to be able to be extremely flexible in what we do. And however we open, we may have to change that at some point. In fact, I can guarantee you that I think we will, whatever it is. And I saw that too. I like the little hats.
They're adorable.
That might, you know, maybe that would be easy, you know, easier and more cool for the kids to wear than a mask. I myself found these, they're like a nylon face covering that you can slip right over your whole head. You can wet them down and they're cool, and you can pull them up and they're a face covering. And that's the only thing I found so far that I can use, because the rest of them I can't breathe in. So yeah, we're going to learn a lot about PPE.
Oh yeah.
This year. So thank you for that suggestion.
Chelsea, then Lane.
So Pete, I sent you a couple of questions. So these are pretty much coming off of that, but I don't know if you had a chance to look at them. So my first question is, I was a little confused about the policy because the superintendent's authority to spend money is so much based on the budget. So I was wondering, do we need to give additional authority to spend this money? Or is, you mentioned something about grant. Is this considered a grant? So he has the authority? Okay, all right. The next thing that I'm a little concerned about suspending a policy. And I've been thinking about other ways that we could amend this policy that I think would be, would provide a little bit more oversight, because I'm just a policy person. So this is not anything specific. I just think that suspending a policy is a precedent that I don't like to set. So a couple of options that we could do. If you look at the policy, negotiated procurement has a cap of $10,000. And if it goes over $10,000, the superintendent shall consult with the finance committee prior to finalizing yada, yada. We could amend that language to simply say the superintendent should notify the finance and facilities committee. So that would give him the authority to do it, but also preserve the oversight. Another way we could do this would, at the end of the policy, there is a list of exceptions to having to go out to any of the 3 bids or negotiated procurement. We could simply add CRF funds to that list. So I think those would be better options, because again, I don't think that suspending a policy is a good practice in general. But we also then don't require that we follow federal and state laws, and that's why I don't think it's a good idea to suspend a policy when you can amend it. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting you guys are going to break laws and spending the money. If you are, I'll help. But I do think that from a policy perspective, we want to make sure that we're being really consistent and doing the least amount of, making the least amount of changes. So
I don't disagree that the policy needs updating. It's 11 years old since the last time it was adopted. I think in terms of tonight, I think I would recommend that, I think we tried to limit it to just those funds. If you wanted to even add a date certain end date to the suspension, I think that's certainly not a bad idea. But going, and I don't disagree that, once that's done, sending the policy back to the policy committee or sending the policy to finance to then send a policy to update is also is a good idea. But I think that would be, I'm not sure the process, how that would work, just having the board change a policy in one night. John?
I'm going to suggest that that be done anyway, regardless of whatever happens here, because the likelihood of receiving other funds of this nature is in the coming year, maybe I won't put an S on the end of that because I'm a little more positive than that, is pretty high. So I think that policy ought to be reviewed anyway, and then at that time we could certainly update the policy. But again, I think really what this is, it's asking for just some timely speed to get the ball rolling here. And then I think that policy could go back to the committee, and probably should.
Chelsea, do you want to follow
Yeah.
up?
So am I correct that we could make a motion to amend any policy at the moment? Or Lauren, I guess you would have to add the policy to the agenda, but we could then make a motion to amend. Because if we simply changed the exceptions on C, we could make an exception for any CRF money. And then instead of suspending a policy, we're simply saying we don't have to follow the procurement policies for CRF funds. So that accomplishes the exact same thing, but it doesn't suspend a policy. And I think that's a cleaner way of doing it. So I think we can do that very easily in this meeting. You seem confused. Do you want me to walk you through that more?
No, John, did you want to say something?
I don't think so, because to amend a policy, you've got to go through 2 readings. To suspend a policy, you can do it. You could put a time cap on it. You could offer an amendment to make it a time cap up to December 31st, which is the date the money has to be spent.
But as a board, we can go through both readings tonight, right?
Well, I guess the board can do anything they want, but I've never seen that done.
I mean, I fully support Chelsea's idea of amending section C, because it's really clean and it's very specific. And I think we can just do that as opposed to suspending the policy. I really like this idea a lot.
Again, if that's what the board wants to do, I'm not going to stand in the way. I'm trying to give advice, that's all.
Oh yeah, let's pause on that. Lane, you're up next.
I think we sort of got away from the direction of my comments a little bit. But I just wanted maybe to piggyback off of Mark in saying that I do think that long-term infrastructure and hygiene practices will be changing for schools, and that this is kind of an investment. You know, we will need hand sanitizer whenever we open. We will need perhaps an updated air, filtration for the long term, because, we'll see continuing pandemics with the, climate change and everything. So yeah, just to say that, like, I think that it's good that we have this money to put in, and that we are sort of thinking about how we're going to use it. And then the other comment is just quickly, like the science of PPE, just making sure that we're very specific. And I think I have faith that we will be in how we approach it. For instance, face shields aren't known how effective they are as a source control. I'd be very worried about face shields without masks. So things like that, that's nitty gritty work, for the implementation. But we will have to be very careful about all of it.
Thank you. Carol, did you have something to add before Gerald?
Yeah, I just want to say that I like the idea of going ahead with this that's in front of us tonight, adding a date certain, because that gives us time. And if we're going to change a whole policy, I think we have to follow our own rules about doing it over 2 meetings. So I'm not comfortable with doing that. I'd rather just add a date certain.
Yeah, I agree with you, by the way. I'd rather deliberate a little bit more on policy change.
We really are just asking, and maybe you could modify the motion if that's the board's thought to, we're pretty much asking that the CARES funding, no matter what the purchase price, goes through a negotiated procurement process, and not the RFP and not the competitive bid. And then maybe we add the language that Kelsey mentioned, that the Finance and Facilities Committee is notified. Yeah, we are, because we are. If we see somebody, if we know two companies have the same product, we're going to ask both of them. We're going to go through that process anyway, not just pick one and go with it.
Well, you have to be really specific with how that motion could be amended, and it could be done in a friendly way. The person who made the motion could say, sure, I agree to that change. And the person second can do that, or we could have a motion to amend the motion before we get to the motion.
Or the board could unsuspend this motion. They could unsuspend the policy at any time, at any date.
Yeah, I'd prefer, as just to go real clean tonight and then go into more deliberation. With, in 2 weeks we meet again. We can change. We could make a policy change. Then you go to the policy committee and then make it. Chelsea.
One way we could amend the motion that is on the table is to instead say, instead of saying I move that the policy be suspended, we could change the language to say I move that the policy, that we add CRF funds to item C, or we could say that we suspend, oh goodness, now I have to look, that we suspend A2 and A3 and require, actually we could suspend all of the purchasing and then add language along the lines of what Pete said. So we can actually make some changes to the motion that's on the table. I don't think we have to amend the policy because the motion on the table is already impacting the policy.
Yes, Gerald.
I agree with what Lane said. As a husband of a kindergarten teacher, she brings home everything from the classroom, and that we will be looking at this. Carol, the name of the hat is a sou'wester, is the specific name, and John, you're talking about a balaclava. And I'm not an expert on bipolar ionization in buildings, but it's used throughout the world in large facilities, hospitals, airport terminals. I'm happy to do some research and provide it to the board as to how often it is, but it actually is effective. It's been proven effective. It charges the air, and I don't know about the science, but it actually does impact viruses and bacteria.
Along those lines, I'm wondering if Pete and John, if Gerald could call a finance and facilities meeting next Thursday at 6:30, just to review where we're at. And then any one of you obviously can join that meeting, but
should we do it at 5:30?
6:30.
Are we? This isn't the board meeting? No, yeah, we can do it at 6:30. Yeah, I can look into that.
The board meeting is in 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah.
Yeah. So next week, just to review, again, big ticket items, if that is helpful to keep us in the loop, if that is helpful. Because decisions, we're very lucky to be meeting tonight, by the way, just to be clear. We're very lucky that we had this meeting planned, because a lot of school boards, they're not going to get to what we're doing until later, and we literally can jump the gun because, as you all said, the competition for items is going to be immense. So anyway, Gerald, communicate with Pete, talk about it, whether or not it makes sense to have a meeting of finance and facilities a week from tonight at 6:30, to which everybody is obviously invited. Okay, further thoughts, questions, or ideas on this motion? Again, my opinion is let's just vote this up and down. If again, we can change anything we want in 2 weeks when we return, if that helps with the process right now. I really want them to have authorization like tonight to go, because I really don't know if you guys have any vacation plans, but this just blows everything. You're like, Pete, like, no, John, yeah, because this just blows everything out of the water for, obviously you guys have to work extra hard, even harder than you already are. And I literally can't imagine. I just can't imagine. So I just love to give you authorization tonight. Real clean, real clear, go. And unless there's anything added, I'm going to have John call the roll on this motion. I'm speaking slowly, like a
Lauren Andrews,
yes.
Tom Pico, absent. Susan Thomas,
Yes.
Chelsea Everett,
No.
Gerald Winan,
Yes.
Mark Lewis,
Yes.
Carol Backhoffner,
Yes.
Lane Sturdivant,
Yes.
Doug Curtis Jr.,
Yes.
Amy Williams Spears.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you. So Chelsea, I encourage you or anyone else to contact Tom, who's currently head of the policy committee, to look at making any changes that we want to make or need to make, consult with Pete and John as well, that we should do 2 weeks from tonight at our regular business meeting. Because I think we should be right on top of that as we go forward with COVID policies, related policies, spending, et cetera. But for now, I think we've done a good job to get this off the ground tonight. Yes, Mark.
I just wanted to throw in real quick. I don't know if anyone's heard public radio, the main calling show a couple nights ago or a couple days ago, but they had a really good, it was returning to school, and they had Pender Macon and a doctor from Maine Health. There was a panel talking about this whole thing. But the point that I heard that I took away from this was that it's entirely doable getting the kids to wear their masks. First of all, she said the two biggest things we can do is masks and distancing. And they made the point that the Europeans have been ahead on this. The European countries that have seen a decline in numbers, they were able to maintain that and they didn't see any uptick in the schools. They brought the kids back to schools, but they made, and unless, I guess what they were talking about was that, I'm trying to think of the way to describe this. Kids 2 and under had a harder time, but kids 3 and up had no trouble wearing masks and keeping them on. And special needs kids and the life skills kids, some of those kids had trouble, keeping. I'm not sure what allowances they made for that or whatnot, but anyway, I was somewhat encouraged by listening to that. It's doable. And again, a lot of it depends on what we have going on here in our district and our state at the time. I totally get that. But I think the odds currently are in our favor. And I think we just need to kind of keep that in mind and try to make decisions based on that and on data, not on fear.
A lot of it's going to involve parent and family buy-in. And
Yes.
if they're not getting the support at home, they're going to show up at school without that support.
Yeah.
So that's a big factor, as we need to sell it to families.
Yep. Good point.
Exactly.
I want to make it clear about the 2 pots of money that we have. And Pete, correct me if I'm wrong. We have $600,000 in CARES money that we can spend over a 2-year period of time. We have a $1.4 million infusion as of yesterday, that we have to spend before December 30th. So let's say, as an example, we wanted to reimburse parents for gas because they want to bring their kids in, but they're low income, really can't afford that long trip from wherever every single day twice. And so we give them some money for that. We can't do that with the 1.4 because we have to spend that money by the end of December. We can do that, correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, with the original CARES money of 600,000 because that's a 2-year authorized expenditure, correct?
I'm not comfortable with the example.
Yeah.
Choose another one then, but anyway.
We could pay for professional development out of the short-term money to help teachers and staff get ready for kids to come back or whatever the board decides, whatever we do as a program, we could actually help train our staff to make sure that we're ready for the parents. But we probably couldn't just hire a social worker with this money, whereas the CARES money we could.
So, for example, we could pay for an in-service day for teachers for training and how to wash hands and all that. That would be an additional fee to their contract.
Correct.
Justin.
With the CARES money.
Actually, come to think of it, I meant to ask about the calendar change that we got an email about, because did that include additional teacher days or not? I wasn't quite sure.
We moved 2 workshop days from the end of the year to the beginning of the year because we knew we'd need more time for teachers to plan. And at that point in time, I had to do some fancy footwork to make sure it was going to fly with the Teachers Association. I'm glad we did it because we definitely need the time.
Okay. Anything else before we finish up?
Hey, Lauren, just one quick thing.
Yep.
Gerald, if it's possible, if we meet next Thursday, I'd like to put out that I would go to 5:30 versus 6:30. If that's true with everybody else, that would help me a little bit.
I have a patient until 6, if that's all right. I just don't get done till 6. That's
Okay. No, that's fine. I mean, I'm just asking, so
Yep.
I understand.
Yep.
But also, I just want to, rest assured that we will be giving the board the information of how this money is going to be directed. First, when we develop the 30,000-foot level for you guys, and then as we get down to 10,000 feet, I think we'll bring you along the process.
Good.
So,
And that's exactly the view we want to remain at and stick with and know
Yeah.
and approve. Yeah. Yes, Gerald.
And I've mentioned this before, but it's really important that we need to be flexible because things are going to change. I mean, everyone knows this, but it's good to be reminded. We have to be flexible individually, as a board, as a district, because we need to bob and weave as things come at us.
Go through in our COVID year. Yep. Bob and weave.
Yep.
There you go, Doug.
Yep. I'm not sure I can unsee that.
I'll see you at the playground, Doug.
Yeah. Anything further? If not, Lane, thank you for making the motion to adjourn. Thank you, Mark, for seconding. It is a vote. And we will see you all later. Thank you very much for all your contributions, as always. See ya.
Good night.